So you've been assigned a country, you've got a topic to research, and in a few days, you're going to walk into a committee room full of people and be expected to represent that country on the world stage. So where do you start? My name is Fuad Abdirizak, professional debater and the training director of GLUNS. And this video is your practical guide to everything that happens from the moment you get your assignment to the moment the gavel comes down on the final vote. Right? We're covering everything: preparation, procedure, public speaking, negotiation, and resolution writing. The full picture. If you've never been to an MUN conference before, or if you've been to one and you feel lost, or you just want a refresh on what GA handles and what you should be expecting, then this video is for you. So let's get into it. So in the General Assembly, strong MUN performance starts before the conference, and it rests on 3 pillars. So the first pillar is functional preparation, which is knowing how MUN works, the rules, the motions, the flow of debate, right? We'll get into all of that in the next segment. The second, however, is substantive preparation. What's this? This is understanding your topic that the committee is discussing, okay? Keep in mind that in GA at least, the topic you'll be discussing is dependent on the committee you're in, right? As GA is divided into committees, which you'll understand when you enter the committee, when you enter MUN. For example, if you're in UN Women, then you'll probably be discussing something involving women's rights. So make sure you conform to such a regard, okay? The third part is positional preparation, understanding your assigned country well enough to speak and negotiate for them, right? You need all 3. If you miss one, you'll feel it in the room. So your starting point when it comes to preparation is the background guide. What's that? The background guide is a document written by your committee directors before the conference. So you must read it carefully. It's very important. It has enough information for you to at least be able to hold your own in a room. Because the background guide is a foundation. It's not a ceiling, it's a foundation. But even so, go deeper. Look into the root causes of the issue at hand. What solutions have already been tried? What's happening right now? Where key solutions and regional blocks stand, okay? So there's good sources that you can use. UN yearbooks, UN resolutions, the UN Chronicle, quality newspapers. There's information everywhere. You just have to know where to look for it. Now, think like a policymaker analyzing a problem, not a student cramming for a test. So here's the part that trips up a lot of first-timers. In MUN, you don't represent yourself, you represent your country. So that means setting aside your personal opinions and figuring out what your assigned country actually believes, based on its history, its economy, its political system, and relationships with other nations. Keep that in mind. That comes very important in UNMOD, which we'll get to later. Now, there's an important distinction to understand here. National interests versus national policies. What do I mean? National interests are your country's long-term goals, what it ultimately wants, okay? Now, these are generally non-negotiable, okay? However, national policies are the methods your country uses to pursue those interests, and those are more flexible. Let me give you an example. Say your country's national interest is regional stability. Its policy might be supporting peacekeeping operations, right? That might be what your country wants. Because keep in mind, you're speaking for your country, not for you. In committee, you can negotiate on how peacekeeping is implemented. But you're not going to abandon your commitment to regional stability to make a deal. Because again, you're representing your country. And when you're representing your country, make sure that you have your country's interests at heart. So before the conference, you'll submit a position paper. What's this? It's a 1-page, single-spaced paper. And it covers 3 things. First of all, the background of the topic, your country's position, and your proposed solutions. Write it in 3rd person. Keep in mind, 3rd person. The Republic of Kenya believes, or the delegation of Kenya believes, not I believe. It needs a proper heading with your committee, country, topic, your name, and your school. Okay? This will be a recurring theme throughout MUN, by the way. So, the position paper isn't just a formality. It forces you to crystallize your country's stance before you walk in. The delegates who've done this work come in confident, but the ones who haven't, it'll show. Now we go on to rules of procedure. What are these? Well, they're not here to trip you up. They're tools, okay? Tools that help a room full of 40+ delegates actually function without descending into chaos. So you don't need to memorize every rule. You just need to know the key ones well enough to use them confidently. So let's walk you through a session from start to finish. Now, every session begins with a roll call. When your country is called, you respond either present or present and voting. If you say present and voting, you're giving up the right to abstain on substantive votes later, which shall talk about in a few minutes. So choose carefully. However, I prefer if you do choose that because it shows your preparation and your general ability to engage, right? So once attendance is taken, a delegate moves to open debate. For example, the delegation of dash country motions to open debate on agenda item X. Simple majority carries it. You're off. There goes the committee. Everything starts from there. The speakers list is the backbone of formal debate. It's the ordered queue of delegates who want to speak. Raise your placard, which is the paper you'll be given to represent your country, to be added to the speakers list. Typically, you'll have 1 minute to speak. Your speech on the speakers list is your public statement of where your country stands, okay? Speak clearly, stay within time, and address your remarks to the chair, not to other delegates directly. So 2 motions you'll use constantly in GA, moderated and unmoderated caucus. So moderated caucus is structured debate with a specific subtopic. The chair stays in control and calls on speakers one at a time. Formal debate, might I say. Use it when you want focused discussion, comparing positions, exploring specific solutions, or responding to something the delegate just said. So the phrasing, if you want to raise moderated caucus, is the delegation of dash country motions for a moderated caucus on this topic. Total time X minutes, Y seconds per speaker. Okay? An unmoderated caucus, however, is where the actual diplomacy happens. No formal structure. Delegates move around the room, they talk to each other, form alliances, and start drafting. The phrasing, the delegation of dash country, motions for an unmoderated caucus for X minutes. So make sure you follow such framing when you're making your points. Speaking of points, what are these? These are procedural interruptions, which we're going to be using during debate, okay? Don't overuse them, but make sure you do use them when they're important in the debate. There are 3. First of all, point of personal privilege for personal discomfort, or if you can't hear the speaker. This one can interrupt the speaker. Keep that in mind. A point of order is when a procedural rule has been violated, and a point of parliamentary inquiry when you have a question about procedure. Those last 2 can't interrupt the speaker when they're speaking, but the first one can. Keep that in mind. So when debate is done, a delegate moves to close debate and move into voting procedure. So there are 2 vote types. Procedural votes, yes or no only, no abstentions, and substantive votes, used for resolutions where you can vote yes, no, or abstain if you said present in the speakers list or in the roll call. A simple majority passes a resolution, so more yes votes than no votes, and abstentions don't count towards either side. So once voting begins, no more debate. Remember, use we and our whenever you're debating. Focus on the issue, not the person. The language of diplomacy is constructive by design, and it works, okay? So after a speaker's list speech, and this is just a fun fact, you can yield your remaining time. Yield to questions from the delegates, you can yield back to the chair, you can yield to your fellow delegates, and they can get your leftover time. And using this yielding definitely proves your ability to understand the basics of what MUN is about. So choose based on what serves your position best. So now on unmod, while we say that formal debate establishes where everyone stands, unmoderated caucus is where you actually move things forward. This is where MUN gets interesting, guys, because the most effective delegates aren't just the most frequent speakers. They're the ones who listen carefully, they're the ones who identify where compromise is possible, and they're the ones who build broad coalitions around the realistic situations. Okay? The ones that can communicate, the ones that can socialize, the ones that can make blocks. What's a bloc? A bloc is a group of delegates with enough common ground to work towards a shared resolution. Okay? When figuring out who to work with, think about 3 things. Which countries naturally align with your position, regional groupings, shared interests, historical alliances, who the people are. A collaborative debate or delegate attracts allies even from unexpected places. And which of your policy priorities are non-negotiable versus where you have room to compromise, right? So, first impressions in a multi-day conference matter. Let's keep that in mind. Send notes early, acknowledge other delegates' good points, make it clear that if someone works with you, their ideas will have a place in the resolution. So, having said that, when unmod starts, first, huddle with your allies and review what came out of formal debate. Decide what's acceptable and what isn't. Second, agree on core principles. Don't try to resolve every detail straight away. We're all human and we all have some limitations that we all have to work with other people to fix, okay? Just establish a unified front. Third, reach out beyond your bloc. Talk to other delegations, identify potential allies, and flag likely opposition. Fourth, once there's enough consensus, start drafting resolutions, which I'll get to in a minute. So even great ideas need to be communicated. Keep your solutions practical and easy to explain, okay? Identify your main policy priority and make it your brand, something the committee can associate with your delegation. And remember the line between compromising on policy, which is expected, and abandoning your country's core interests, which is not. Remember, you are a delegate. You are not just an MUN member. You are a delegate of a country. Represent your country. Know your non-negotiables before you enter any negotiation, okay? At the end of all of this, your committee produces a resolution, the formal written output that identifies the problem and proposes specific, actionable responses. So resolutions go through stages. Working papers first, which are informal drafts produced during unmod, which are working with other people to at least find some solutions together. Then draft resolutions, which are more refined and formally introduced. Then amendments, then a final vote. So how do resolutions work? There's preambulatory clauses. They come first. They provide background and context, explaining why action is needed, okay? Each one begins with a phrase, which is italicized, by the way. Use italics when you're making this phrase, like acknowledging, deeply concerned, or recalling, and ends with a comma. So they reference past actions, established principles, and the nature of the problem. Second is operative clauses. They're the heart of the resolution. They propose the actual actions, the solutions that you had during unmod. Each one is numbered, begins with an underlined present tense verb, for example, urges, calls upon, establishes, recommends, and ends with a semicolon, okay? The final operative clause ends with a full stop. Keep that in mind. Strong operative clauses address root causes, not just symptoms. They're specific, they're action-oriented. If you use vague language, then you're committing to nothing. And they're realistic too. They stay within the committee's mandate and reflect what's actually achievable, okay? Once a draft resolution is introduced, delegates can propose amendments. Friendly amendments accepted by all sponsors. By the way, make sure you get sponsors in unmod. Get some powerful members like the US or something and make sure they're on your side for sponsors, right? Now, those are incorporated immediately. Unfriendly amendments go to a vote and need a simple majority to pass. They come from other sources, maybe other blocks. When voting begins, standard is a placard vote. Yes, no, or abstain if you can, okay? So division of the question lets the committee vote on specific clauses separately, and reordering motions lets you change which resolution gets voted on first. Important because typically only one passes per topic, so make sure your block has the best paper. So to conclude, MUN awards go to delegates who demonstrate genuine diplomatic impact, thorough research, substantive speeches, real coalition building in unmod, meaningful contributions to resolutions, the whole thingamajig. Not just to whoever spoke the most. This isn't just debate, it's bigger than that. The delegates who focus on actual participation, who come prepared, who listen, who collaborate, they tend to perform the best. And they'll probably get awards for that. And recognition follows naturally. So, you've got everything you need now to start with the GA. I hope I've been of service. My name is Fuad Abdirizak, and good luck in your committee.